The night he told me he was fine. He said he was fine. That was the first thing out of his mouth, before I'd even set my bag down, before I'd asked a single question. Just this quiet, almost defensive, "I'm fine," from a man sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, still in his dress shirt, one hand pressed flat against his thigh, like he was trying to hold something in place. His name was Daniel, and he was not fine. I didn't know yet, standing in the doorway of that room on the 14th floor, that the next 2 hours would rearrange something small but permanent inside me. I didn't know that I'd still be thinking about this particular night years later, the way you think about a song you heard once through someone else's window. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started, which is, like most things in my life, with a phone ringing at the worst possible moment. It was the kind of October night that can't decide what it wants to be. Not quite cold enough for a coat, not warm enough to go without one. That in-between feeling that makes the whole city feel slightly unresolved. I was on call for a private medical concierge service, which sounds much more glamorous than it is, by the way. Mostly it means you're the person who shows up when someone's traveling and needs a prescription refilled, or they've twisted an ankle, or they've convinced themselves they're having a heart attack because they had 2 espressos and a red-eye flight. The call came in around 9:30. Hotel guest, mid-40s, reported pain and swelling in his right leg. Had been traveling for work, no regular doctor in the city. The front desk had called us because that's what the hotel's medical partnership was for. I remember pulling on my jacket and looking out my window for just a second. The city lights doing that thing they do in October, all amber and a little blurry, like everything slightly out of focus. I had a cup of tea going cold on the counter. I left it. The drive over was maybe 15 minutes. I had my kit in the back seat, blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, stethoscope, a full phlebotomy setup, and a small injection kit because you never know. I had my notepad. I had my gloves, 3 pairs, because I always pack extra gloves. Old habit from a supervisor in my second year who used to say, "Always assume the first pair will tear." I liked her. She had very little patience for anything, including me, which meant she was excellent at her job. The hotel was one of those places that's trying very hard to feel like it's not a hotel. Warm lighting in the lobby, a fireplace that was definitely gas but looked convincing, a front desk attendant who called me by name when I walked in even though we'd never met. They'd been briefed. The elevator was mirrored and I caught myself in it, hair pulled back, kit bag over one shoulder, that particular expression I get when I'm already running through differentials in my head. My mother calls it my doctor face. Like I've gone somewhere slightly interior and the outside is just on autopilot. 14th floor, room 1408. I paused at that. I almost laughed. I knocked anyway. The door opened and there was Daniel. He was, I'll say this carefully, the kind of person who clearly spent most of his life being the most composed person in the room. You could see it in the way he stood, even now. Straight posture, controlled expression. The dress shirt was actually still tucked in, which, given that he'd apparently been in pain for several hours, struck me as almost heroic in its stubbornness. "I'm fine," he said. "Of course you are," I said. "Can I come in?" The room smelled like recycled air and coffee, and just faintly, underneath it all, that particular scent that hotel rooms get when someone's been anxious in them for a while. Something slightly metallic. Tension has a smell. I've always thought so. He'd been in the city for a conference. 3 days. The leg had started bothering him that afternoon. Tightness at first, then swelling below the knee. Then the kind of ache that makes you walk differently without realizing you're doing it. His colleague had noticed at dinner and told him to call someone. He'd waited 2 more hours before agreeing. I set my bag on the desk and started asking questions in the way that I hope doesn't feel like questions. More like conversation, like I'm just curious about his day. When did it start? Was there any redness? Had he been sitting for long periods? Long flight in? Yes, from Seattle, 7 hours with a layover. Any history of clotting? He hesitated on that one. His father had had a DVT once, he said. Deep vein thrombosis. He knew what it was. That's why you waited 2 hours, I said. It wasn't a question. He looked at me then, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in. There was something almost rueful in it. If I didn't call, it wasn't real yet. I understood that completely. I didn't say so, but I did. Here's the thing about deep vein thrombosis that I want you to understand because it matters. It actually matters, not just for Daniel, but for anyone who's ever done a long flight and felt that heaviness in their legs and thought, I'll stretch later. DVT is a clot that forms in a deep vein, usually in the lower leg or thigh. The danger isn't just the clot itself. It's what happens if a piece of it breaks free and travels to the lungs, where it becomes a pulmonary embolism. That's the emergency. That's the one that can kill you without much warning. The signs to watch for: swelling in one leg, not both; warmth; redness or a dusky discoloration along the inner calf; pain that's worse when you flex your foot upward. Any of these after a long flight, after a long period of sitting, after surgery. You don't wait. You don't call it fine. You call someone. Daniel had the swelling. He had the warmth. He had the ache. What he didn't have, thankfully, was any chest pain, any shortness of breath, any of the signs that would have made me call an ambulance instead of doing what I did next, which was draw his blood. I needed a D-dimer, a blood test that measures a protein fragment produced when a clot breaks down. It's a screening tool. A negative result is very reassuring. A positive one means you need imaging. I had a rapid test kit in my bag, results in about 20 minutes. I need to take some blood, I told him. He nodded. Then, after a second, I'm not great with needles. I looked at him, this composed, tucked in, controlled man who had clearly been sitting alone with his fear for 2 hours rather than call anyone. You know, I said, statistically, more people are uncomfortable with needles than are comfortable with them. You're in the majority. That's very reassuring, he said, in a tone that suggested it was not. Sit on the bed. Give me your left arm. He sat. He rolled up his sleeve, carefully, like he was buying himself time, and I pulled on my gloves and got my supplies out. Tourniquet, alcohol swab, butterfly needle, collection tube, gauze, tape. Everything in order on the desk beside me. Here's what I want to tell you about drawing blood from a vein, because it's one of those things that looks simple and isn't. And the difference between someone who knows what they're doing and someone who doesn't is something you feel immediately when you're on the receiving end. First, you find the vein before you do anything else. You don't guess. You look and you feel. The median cubital vein, the one that crosses the inside of the elbow, is usually the best choice. It's large, it's relatively fixed, and it's close to the surface. But everyone's anatomy is slightly different, so you palpate first. You press gently with your fingertip, and you feel for that slight give, that subtle bounce that tells you there's a vessel there. Daniel's veins were actually cooperative. Good hydration, which I noted. He'd been drinking water, not just coffee, which matters more than people realize. Dehydration makes veins collapse and roll and generally behave like they're personally offended by the needle. Staying well hydrated before any blood draw or IV placement isn't just comfort advice, it's practical. I applied the tourniquet about 3 inches above the elbow. Not too tight. You want to slow venous return, not cut off arterial flow. I asked him to open and close his fist a few times to engorge the vein. Okay, I said. Look away if you want to. I'll look, he said, stubborn. I almost smiled. I swabbed the site with alcohol. You always let it dry completely before inserting the needle, because wet alcohol stings more and can contaminate the sample. And then I held the skin taut with my thumb, pulling slightly downward to anchor the vein. The needle goes in at about 15 to 30 degrees, bevel up, not straight down, not flat, that middle angle. You advance slowly, watching for the flash of blood in the hub of the needle, that little red bloom that tells you you're in. There it was. I released the tourniquet, attached the collection tube, and let the vacuum do its work. You're doing great, I said. You're patronizing me, he said. A little, I admitted. Does it help? A pause. A little. I pressed gauze to the site when I was done, had him bend his elbow to hold it, and set the test running. 20 minutes. We had 20 minutes of waiting, which in a hotel room with a near stranger is either awkward or it becomes something else entirely. It became something else. He asked me how long I'd been doing this. I told him. He asked if I'd always wanted to work in medicine. That question that people ask when they're trying to understand something about you that they can't quite name. I told him the truth, which is that I'd wanted to be a lot of things before I figured out that what I actually wanted was to be useful, to be the person in the room who knew what to do. Is that what you are tonight? He asked. The person who knows what to do? Tonight, yes, I said. Ask me again on a Tuesday. Tuesdays are harder. He laughed. Actual, unguarded laughter, the kind that surprises the person doing it. And something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, just the air got slightly easier to breathe. He told me about the conference, about the paper he'd presented. He was an engineer, structural, the kind who thinks about bridges and whether they'll hold. I found that interesting in a way I didn't entirely examine at the time. A man who spends his days calculating load-bearing capacity, sitting here, unable to calculate whether his own body was safe. We all have blind spots about ourselves. That's not a judgment, it's just true. The D-dimer came back. I looked at it. Then I looked at his leg again, the swelling, the warmth, and I made a decision. The result was borderline, not clearly negative, not screaming positive, that middle ground that exists to remind you that medicine is not a series of clean answers. This is where I want to be honest with you, because I think it matters. In that moment, there were two things I could have done. I could have said the number was probably nothing, sent him to bed with instructions to elevate his leg, and told him to see a doctor in the morning. Or I could have said what I actually believed, which was that with his family history, his symptoms, and this result, he needed imaging tonight. I'm going to recommend you go to the emergency department, I said. Not because I'm certain, because I'm not certain enough. He was quiet for a moment. If you were certain, he said slowly, would I be more scared or less scared? Less, I said. Certainty, even bad certainty, is easier than the in-between. He nodded. He called a car. Before he left, I walked him through a few things. Because the ER would take time, it always does, and I wanted him to know what to watch for while he waited. If, at any point, he felt sudden chest pain, sharp, worse with breathing, shortness of breath that came on fast, a racing heartbeat that didn't slow down, lightheadedness, those were the signs that something had moved. Those were the signs to stop waiting and say those words immediately. I think I have a pulmonary embolism. Say them clearly. Don't soften them. The triage nurse needs to hear them. He wrote it down, in his phone, in his notes app, in that careful engineer's way of his, organized, precise. I watched him type and thought about how strange it is, the things we do to feel like we have some control over what's happening to our bodies. Is there anything else? He asked. Keep your leg elevated in the car, I said. Don't walk more than you have to. And drink water, not coffee. Water. You keep coming back to water. Water is underrated, I said, by almost everyone. Always. I packed up my kit, gloves off, inside out, the way you do. Everything back in its place. The room had that quality it gets when something has shifted, and you're both aware of it, but neither of you is going to name it out loud. He walked me to the door, which was unnecessary, given that the door was 6 feet away, and he was the one who was supposed to be resting his leg. But I didn't say that. Thank you, he said, and then, I was scared, earlier, before you got here. I know, I said. Does that happen a lot? People being scared and pretending they're not? I thought about it. Every shift, every call, every person who says, I'm fine before you've even asked. It's the most common thing I see, I said. More common than any actual diagnosis. He smiled at that, just slightly, and I thought, I still think, that it was one of the more honest things I'd said all evening. I took the elevator back down, mirrored again. Me and my kit bag, and the faint smell of his room still on my jacket, that recycled air, that coffee, that particular quality of a night that hadn't finished being itself yet. I didn't know, standing in that elevator, how the imaging would come out. I found out later. He sent a message through the service, which they forwarded to me the next morning. Small clot distal calf, caught early, anticoagulants started. He was flying home in 2 days with a plan and a follow-up appointment, and, he said, a new appreciation for water. I stood in the lobby for a moment before walking out. The gas fireplace was still going. The front desk attendant gave me a small nod. Outside, the October night was still doing its in-between thing. Not cold, not warm, not quite decided. I thought about what he'd said. If I didn't call, it wasn't real yet. I think about that a lot, actually. The way we negotiate with our own fear. The way we give ourselves these little windows of not knowing because knowing feels like it costs something. And maybe it does. But not knowing costs more in the end. It almost always costs more. There's something I want to say about the work itself, the part that's hard to explain to people who haven't done it. When you draw someone's blood, when you slide a needle into a vein and feel that flash, when you put your gloved hand on someone's leg and feel the warmth of inflammation under your palm, you are doing something that is both completely technical and completely intimate. These two things coexist. They don't cancel each other out. The technical part is real. The angle of the needle matters. The choice of vein matters. Knowing the difference between a D-dimer that's reassuring and one that isn't, that matters enormously. I don't romanticize the medicine. It's a discipline. It has rules. The rules exist because bodies are not forgiving of carelessness. But the intimacy is also real. Someone is letting you touch them when they're frightened. Someone is trusting that you know what you're doing, and more than that you care whether it goes well. That trust is not nothing. It has weight. I feel it every time. I wonder sometimes if that's why people say, I'm fine, even when they're not. Because asking for help means admitting that you need someone else's hands on your problem, and that's vulnerable in a way that has nothing to do with needles. I got home around midnight. My tea was still on the counter, completely cold. I made a new cup and stood at the window for a while, looking at the city doing its amber, blurry October thing. I thought about Daniel in the emergency department, sitting in that particular fluorescent purgatory that ERs always are. His leg elevated, his phone out, that engineer's list of symptoms typed neatly in his notes app, waiting for the ultrasound, waiting to find out if the thing he'd been afraid of was real. I thought about his father's DVT, the way that kind of thing lives in a family, quietly, in the back of everyone's mind. The way he'd hesitated when I asked about it, like even saying the words out loud was giving them too much power. And I thought about the moment in the room when he laughed, that unguarded, surprised laugh, the way it changed his face entirely, the way it made the 20 minutes of waiting feel like something other than waiting. There's a version of this job that's just logistics. Show up, assess, treat, document, leave. And sometimes it is exactly that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Efficiency saves lives too. But then there are nights like that one, where the logistics are almost beside the point, where what actually happened was that a man who'd been sitting alone with his fear for 2 hours finally let someone else into the room with it, and that, just that, changed something. I don't know what he thought of me. I don't know if he remembers the details of that night the way I do, or if for him it's just the night he ended up in the ER with a clot in his calf. That's fine. That's how it should be, actually. The patient gets to move on. The one with the kit bag carries the stories. I'm not complaining. I like the stories. I like the way they accumulate. All these rooms, all these people, all these moments of "I'm fine" that turn into something true underneath. He said he was fine, and by the time I left, in the only way that actually mattered, he was. That's the thing about those words. They're not always a lie. Sometimes they're just early. Sometimes "I'm fine" is where you start, and the work, the real work, is getting there together. The tea was good that night. The city was still amber and slightly out of focus. And somewhere across town, a structural engineer was lying in a hospital bed with his leg elevated, learning that the body he'd spent 40-some years inside of had a few things left to teach him. I hope he drank his water.